Hey class, Mr. Handry here. For today's lesson, we're going to be taking a look at section 5.1, which is going to deal with exploring triangle congruency. Now, Module 5 and Module 6 is going to really deal with this idea of congruent triangles, what makes them congruent, and how we know that. Now, today's lesson is just that introduction into triangle congruency and how we can figure out triangles are congruent or not, and what information we can use from them. All right, for today we have one learning goal, and our learning goal is that you will be able to show and explain what makes two triangles congruent. So today they're going to give you two triangles in each problem, and they're going to ask you to determine if they are congruent or not, and how you know that. So what is this idea of congruency and how we know triangles are congruent? Now, you can apply what you've learned about corresponding parts of congruent figures to write the following true statement about triangles. If two triangles are congruent, meaning they are the same shape and the same size, meaning they are equal, they are the same, then the corresponding parts of the triangle are congruent. So if I know two triangles are congruent, then I know each of their corresponding parts are congruent as well. Meaning, if I know two triangles are the same, I know the different angles have matching parts and the different sides have matching parts as well. Now, the statement is sometimes referred to as CP-CTC. The converse of CP-CTC can be stated as follows. If all corresponding parts of two triangles are congruent, then the two triangles are congruent. So that's what we're going to look at for today, is that if all the corresponding parts of two triangles are congruent. So that means that if you have an angle that corresponds to another angle for all three of them, and the same thing for all the sides, if they all have a matching part from the one triangle to the other, then you know the two triangles are congruent. And we'll talk about all that here in a second. Now, this kind of goes through a little bit more, and it states that two triangles are congruent if and only if corresponding pairs of sides and corresponding pairs of angles are congruent. So today we're going to state whether or not two triangles are congruent if and only if pair of sides and pair of angles are congruent. And it has to be all pairs of sides and angles for them to be congruent. Alright, so with all that kind of out of the way and stated, let's go ahead and get into our first example and explore how we're going to do this today. So, let me move this on up, and let's take a look at example 1. Now, example 1 states, determine whether the triangles are congruent and explain your reasoning. So we need to go through and determine if the triangles in part A are congruent to each other. So we have triangle GJH and KLM. We have to determine if these are in fact congruent. So how you're going to go through and do this is you have to determine if all the angles have a matching pair and if all the sides have a matching pair from this triangle to this one. So I'm going to start out with the angles and see if they do. Let's go ahead, and it doesn't matter where you start. Let's start with angle H. So angle H is a right angle. It's 90 degrees. So if we look in our other triangle, is there an angle over here that is 90 degrees and also a right angle? Well, angle L is a right angle as well. So that means angle H is congruent to angle L. And you're just going to run through that for the other two angles as well. So if next I look at angle J, so angle J is 60 degrees. Do I have an angle that matches 60 in this triangle? Angle M is also 60 degrees. So that means that angle J is congruent to angle M. J and M are 60, just like H and L are 90. And then lastly, we have angle G. Angle G is 30 degrees, and I know in this triangle that angle K is 30 as well. So that means angle G is congruent to angle K. So again, H is congruent to L because H and L are 90 degrees. J is congruent to M because J and M are 60. And G is congruent to K because G and K are 30 degrees. So I've now gone through and matched and found my congruent or corresponding pairs of angles. I now have to go through and identify all three side lengths if they have a matching part. So again, it doesn't matter which side you start with. Let's go ahead and start with GH. So the measure of GH is 1.7. Do I have a side length in LKM that is 1.7? Okay, I know that this side length, LK, is 1.7. So because these are both 1.7, I know GH is congruent to KL. And then we're just going to do that for the other two side lengths. JH is 1. Is there a side length over here that is also 1? I know that LM is 1 because that's what they tell me. So I know that JH and LM, or ML, are the same measure, so they're congruent. And then lastly, GJ is 2, and I know that KM is also 2. So that means GJ is the same measure as KM. So again, I know that GH and KL are congruent because they're both 1.7. I know that JH and ML are congruent because they're both 1. And that GJ and KM are congruent because they're both 2. So I have now successfully gone through and found all three pairs of corresponding angles in all three pair of corresponding sides. So because I was able to successfully find all three angles and all three sides have a corresponding match, that means that I know that these two triangles are congruent. So my answer is yes. And my reasoning is stated right here because I know all three angles and all three sides have a matching pair. So these two triangles are congruent. So that means that I know triangle HJG is congruent to triangle LMK. And that is our answer. So today is going to feel a little bit more drawn out in terms of what you have to do because you have to find all three angles that match, all three sides that match, and then you can state they are congruent. Moving forward, we're going to be talking about shortcuts in future sections. Right now, you just have to find all three sides, all three angles, and you're good to go. If you do not have a matching part for one of the sides or one of the angles, then the two triangles are not congruent. Okay, and I will identify one of those here in a bit. Okay, let's take a look at B. So for B, we have our two triangles RST and UVW. What we need to go through and do is determine if these two are congruent to each other. So first thing, let's go ahead and take a look at the side lengths. If I start with angle R in this triangle, we need to go through and find a matching angle in this one. Well, angle R is 71 degrees, and over here I have two 71s, U and W. Doesn't matter which one you go with, that's completely up to you. It just has to have a matching part. So I'm going to say angle R, because it's 71, is congruent to angle W, because it is also 71. If you want to go with angle U, that works as well. So continuing with the 71 theme, I'm going to say angle T, which is also 71, is congruent to angle U. I don't want to use W again, but is congruent to angle U because it is also 71. And then lastly, I have angle R, or not R, angle S, which is 38. And I know that V is also 38. So I can say that angle S is congruent to angle V because they're both 38. So R and W are congruent because they're 71. T and U are congruent because they're 71. And S and V are congruent because they're 38. Alright, so I've successfully gone through and found my matching angles. I now have to go through and determine if I can find my matching side lengths. So first, let's take a look at RS for right here. So RS, they don't tell me the actual angle measure, but they tell me with this tick mark what the matching part needs to look like. And if we see over here, I've got 2 tick marks that match this one, same as with ST. So what this means is that all 4 of these sides are congruent to each other. That means they're all equal to each other. So I can say RS is congruent to WV. And then I can also say that TS is congruent to UV. So again, the reason I can say that these pair of sides are congruent to each other is because the diagram gave me tick marks, which indicates that this is congruent to this, and this is congruent to this. That would mean that all 4 of these sides are the same measure. So if I just gave a random measurement, let's say 10, I would know RS is 10, ST is 10, UV is 10, and WV is also 10. That's what the tick marks are telling you. Now, if we notice, okay, our third side, RT, has 2 tick marks, just like UW has 2 tick marks. So what this means is that this side is congruent to this one, but this side is not congruent to these parts, and the same for this. Because these are 1 tick marks, that means it has to match all the 1s, whereas the 2 tick marks are a different measure. So, for example, if all these were 10, that would mean that this one would be something different, let's say 5, and this would be 5 as well. So if I know RT, that means that I can say RT is congruent to VW, or VU, sorry. Alright, so have I successfully said that all 3 angle measures have a matching corresponding pair in the other, and do all 3 side lengths have a matching corresponding pair? I have, because I have shown that right here. That's my explanation. So because I have all 3 angles have a corresponding pair, and all 3 sides have a corresponding pair, I can say yes, that these 2 triangles are congruent. So I can say that triangle RST is congruent to WVU. So I can say that these 2 triangles are congruent to each other. Okay, so with that said, that is example 1, part A and B. Now, I do want to take a look at the last 2 here at the bottom, C and D, for a specific reason, and I will talk about that now. Alright, with C, we have triangle ABC and triangle DEF. We have to go through and determine if these 2 triangles are congruent. Now, I'm not told angle measures, so we're not going to focus on that here at first. But let's first focus on the side lengths. So, first, if I look at AB, so AB is 12.1, and I also know that DE is 12.1 as well. So AB is congruent to DE because they're both 12.1. Next, I know that AC, because it's 7.9, is congruent to DF because it's also 7.9. So I can say AC is congruent to DF because again they're both 7.9. Alright, and then lastly, BC is 8.5, and then if I look over here, I do not have an 8.5. So this is 8.5. The only side I haven't used yet is this EF, which is 8.4. Well, this is not a typo. This is what is actually the problem. Because I have 8.5 and 8.4, okay, these would be the sides that need to correspond to each other. Last I checked, 8.5 does not equal 8.4. So I know that BC is not congruent to EF because 8.5 does not equal 8.4. So because I do not have all three sides that match, that means that these are not congruent. So these two triangles are not congruent to each other because one of the side lengths doesn't match the other. So I know that AB and DE, AC and DF match, but BC and EF don't match, so that violates it. So that means these two triangles are not congruent. Alright, and then lastly, with part D, if we look at part D, so we have the triangle BCD and EFG as my two triangles. Now, they do give me the angle measures, so we can go ahead and look at those. If I start with angle D, I know that angle D is 79 degrees, and over here, angle G is 78, F is 60, and E is 42. So there is no matching angle measure for D, and the one I'm specifically going to use is G. So because angle D is not congruent to angle G, that means that these two triangles are not congruent. So instantly right away I found one that doesn't match. Therefore I can say that these are not congruent, and that is my answer. Now you could also say that B is not congruent to E because 41 and 42 do not equal. I do know that C and F are congruent because they're both 60, but because D and G are not congruent and B and E are not congruent, that means that these two triangles are not congruent. So as long as you find one part that is not equal and it's not congruent, that means that the two triangles are not. For two triangles to be congruent, you have to have all six parts, all three angles, and all three sides to be congruent for the two triangles to be congruent. If one part is ever off, that means that the two triangles are not congruent. So, get in the habit today of identifying all three angle pairs and all three side length pairs. If you can do that, they are congruent. If not, they are not. Alright, so with that said, example 2 is going to carry that idea, but it's going to be a touch different. For example 2, it states, find the value of the variable that results in congruent triangles. So for part A, they give me two triangles. I have to go through and figure out what the value of x in this 5x plus 30 should equal. That makes these two triangles congruent. So, let us begin. So all I have to do for this is determine the value of the variable. I don't have to go through and state if they are congruent or not. I don't have to go through and list all the matching pairs. I just need to go through and find the value of x. Now, this 5x plus 30 refers to angle P. So what part does angle P match up with in this triangle? Well, if you notice, okay, angle N is 45, and I know that angle K is 45. So those two match. I also know that angle M is 55, and I know that angle J is also 55. So the angle that P is going to match up with is going to be angle L. Now, they don't tell me what angle L is right off the bat, but I have enough information to figure out what the measure of angle L is. And what I'm going to do is use my calculator. Remember that all three angles in a triangle add up to be 180 degrees. So to figure out the measure of angle L, what I'm going to do is take 180 and subtract it by 55 and 45 to figure out my missing angle. So we're going to do 180 minus 45 minus 55. So any time that they give you two angle measures, you can always find the third angle measure by taking 180 and subtracting it by the two known angles. So if I do that, we get 80 degrees for angle L, which means angle P also needs to equal 80 degrees. Now, while that's good to know, that's not going to get me my exact answer quite yet, because I need to know what x equals. So because angle P needs to equal 80, that means this 5x plus 30 equals 80, and that's how I'm going to set up my problem. So we have 5x plus 30 equals 80, and what we're going to do is go through and solve this to figure out what x equals. Alright, first step would be to subtract the 30 over to the 80, so we're going to do 80 minus 30, and we end up with 50. So we get 5x equals 50, and then I need to divide this 5 to both sides to get x alone. So if I do 50 divided by 5, we get 10 as our value for x. So x needs to equal 10 for these two triangles to be congruent to each other. If you want to double check, you can plug 10 back in. So we do 5 times 10 plus 30, and we get 80, which gives me my last set of congruent angles. Alright, so that's how we're going to go through and do these problems for example 2. If we look at example B, for B, I have my x being this x plus 17, and it refers to angle E. So what angle does E match up with over here? Again, I have 112 for F and 112 for C. I have 25 for G and 25 for D. So that means E is going to be congruent to B. So what is the measure of angle B? Well, I know that C is 112 and D is 25. So knowing that, I can find my third angle measure. Again, we're going to take 180, subtract it by the two known measures, so 112 and 25. And I end up with 43. So that means the measure of angle B is 43 degrees. And that means E also needs to be 43. So I'm going to set these two equal to each other. So we're going to have x plus 17 equals 43. And then all you have to do is just go through and solve to figure out what x equals to result in these two angles being congruent. So we're just going to subtract 17. So we take 43, subtract it by 17, and we end up with 26. for the value of x. So if x is 26, if I plug that back in, 26 plus 17 results in 43. So that means both of these angles are 43. So I now know that these two congruents, or these two triangles, are congruent because I know all three angles and all three sides match. Okay, so that is parts A and B. C and D are going to run through the same thing. It's just unlike we talked about with A and B. C and D deal with side lengths, not angle measures. So I do want to go through and talk about this real quick, at least for one of them, so that way you know what to do. All right, for C, my two triangles ABC and DEF, we have to go through and state if these are congruent. Well, my y, or my variable here, is y, and it's 2y plus 20. So I need to figure out what side length this needs to match over here. So we have 36, 30, and 50. So we need to figure out which one equals this side length. So first step is I'm going to use the side lengths I know over here for the other triangle. So I have 50 mm. I have 50 mm here. So these two sides are congruent. And then I have 30 and 30. So that leaves me with 36. It's the only one I don't have a matching pair for. So that means 36 is going to equal 2y plus 20. So we're going to take these two and set them equal to each other. So we take 2y plus 20 equals 36. And then you just go through and solve. So we would subtract 20 to the right. So we would get 2y equals 16. And then we're going to divide by 2. And we end up with y equaling 8. So my answer is y equals 8. So if I were to plug this y back in real quick for 8, if I did 2 times 8 plus 20, I should get 36. And I do, so I know that these two these two side lengths are the same measure then. So then I know that y needs to equal 8 for these two triangles to be congruent. All right, and then lastly, you're going to do the same thing for D. We're dealing with side lengths again. So I'm trying to figure out what y needs to equal for this 4y plus 12. Well, I already know that 22 matches 22, and 15 matches 15. So that means this 4y plus 12 is going to match up with 32. Okay, I already have my matching pairs for 15 and 15, 22 and 22. I just need a matching pair for 32. So let's figure out what y needs to equal for it to equal 32. Again, we subtract the 12, so we get 4y equals 20. We divide by 4, and 20 divided by 4 is going to give us 5. So that means y needs to equal 5 for these two to be matching. And if you just want to double check, if I plug 5 in, we do 4 times 5 plus 12. I get 32, so then these two sides match up, thus knowing that these two triangles are congruent. All right, so that is it for section 5.1 as we explored triangle congruency. Remember, for today, all three angles have to have a matching pair, and all three side lengths have to have a matching pair in the other triangle. If you can say those two things, then you can say that the two triangles are congruent. If you cannot find a matching side length or a matching angle measure, then the two triangles are not congruent. Alright, so that is it for our video today. If you have any questions, you can always ask me next time you see me or shoot me an email. Be sure to use the completed notes as a guide to help you. But otherwise, that is it for today, and I will talk to you guys later. All right, bye.